The countries in which Cameron Munter has served as a United States envoy are not for the faint of heart. In challenging postings in Europe and Asia, he has distinguished himself as a diplomat in the service of his country. As US ambassador to Serbia, he led efforts to negotiate that country's integration into Europe while managing the Kosovo independence crisis. He has served in several capacities in Baghdad, Iraq, where, among other responsibilities, he established the first ever provincial reconstruction team in the city of Mosul. For 2 years, he has served as the US ambassador to Pakistan. It is no understatement to say that Cameron Munter has managed probably the most challenging bilateral relationship in the world. While US policymakers are occupied with repercussions from Osama bin Laden's death and with the endgame of the troop withdrawal in Afghanistan, Ambassador Munter consistently argues that the long-run success of US interests lies in improving the effectiveness of aid to the country, strengthening its constitutional democracy, developing the vital economic infrastructure, and eradicating poverty and illiteracy. In debates about policy direction between Pakistan and Washington, Ambassador Munter has brought intellectual vigor, forthrightness, and a sense of realism to the discourse. He believes that the most effective and long-lasting diplomacy is between peoples and not just nations. He and his wife, Marilyn Wyatt, have embraced the culture of their host countries wherever they have served. An accomplished pianist, taught as a young boy by none other than our own Margaret Cohn, he opened the Belgrade Jazz Festival when he was ambassador to Serbia. In Pakistan, his personal support of the arts and business and civil society ties between the two countries has generated tremendous goodwill and respect. Cameron Munter was born in Claremont and attended local Claremont public schools. He went on to Cornell University for his BA and Johns Hopkins University for a doctorate in history. He taught at UCLA before joining the Foreign Service. Ambassador Munter, we welcome you back to Claremont. Mr. President, on behalf of the Board of Trustees and the faculty of Pomona College, it is my great honor to present to you Cameron Munter for the honorary degree of Doctor of Laws.
Cameron Munter, by the power vested in me by the Board of Trustees, I confer upon you the degree of Doctor of Laws in Pomona College, honoris causa.
Well, they got ahead of me on this one, that I was going to claim that you can get a degree in John Coltrane. I was going to claim that I had the same piano teacher as Mr. Murray. I was going to claim that I could swing limb from limb. I was going to claim that I was with you in San Diego. I was going to claim a lot of things, but when you're the last to speak, those things are claimed for you. So President Oxtoby and distinguished faculty members, distinguished guests, parents and families, Mom, my wife who's also a mom, and most of all to the students of the class of 2012 at Pomona. Thank you. And I also have to embarrass some people before I really begin. With us today is a Undersecretary of Defense, one of my colleagues in the policy issues that we have to deal with Pakistan, Jim Miller, because he's seeing Allison Miller graduate today. Allison. Great. And not to be outdone, we have also coming all the way from Pakistan, and believe me, it's a 12-hour time difference. We have coming all the way from Pakistan the parents of Mindy Hagan, who work at the American Embassy there as well. It's an honor, really, and a pleasure to stand before you in Claremont, which is a town which shall always be for me a vision of peace and harmony, a world without end. After all, this is where I grew up, where I spent my childhood, remembering the dappled sunlight of my youth. It's a time when I remember the village theater and the spaghetti village and Bentley's market and the center of my life. And maybe you're asking me, what do you mean there's no village theater? There's no spaghetti village, and Bentley's went bust a long time ago. Okay, so this will be a theme that you'll see that things do change. This Claremont that you think is here forever, well, it's not. You are. You'll be going on with a bit of Claremont in your hearts, but the Claremont will change. But in Claremont, idyllic Claremont, there are some monuments that are still here, from my past at least. Here at Pomona College, you may know that there is a building called Big Bridges. It's a splendid symbol of the majesty of Pomona College. I don't think Oxy has one of these. Okay. Just had to throw that in there. But it was strong and silent, looming over your campus, just as it did when I was valedictorian at Claremont High School and spoke inside there in 1972. So every 40 years, I'm going to come back and speak here. But of course, that's not really what I remember about Big Bridges. And what I remember is to share with you what we townies used to think about all of you and your institution. So first, name the 5 composers, left to right. Okay, Wagner, Chopin, Beethoven, Bach, Schubert, right? On the building, right? Pretty good, huh? I have it written down. Now I ask you, what's Wagner doing today? He's decomposing, right? But I'm sorry, that's okay. But I digress. My favorite Pomona memory is of a few young Claremont High School students who, in the dead of night, in the wonderful year of 1972, created a styrofoam replica of a great musician, his name carved in big white letters in styrofoam, and those students who shall remain anonymous climbed to the roof of Big Bridges and placed this stately visage over Schubert. It was a visage of Zappa, raised to the pantheon of all the world to see. Frank Zappa, who attended Claremont High School, I might add. Pomona may have had Chris Christopherson. We had Frank Zappa. So you see, that was the impact of this institution of higher learning on my development as a scholar and a diplomat. Now, you know, who's Zappa, you ask? Who's Christopherson? For that matter, who's Wagner? You know? And I was going to ask, what do they teach you guys these days? Now, I thought Pomona was a top 10 institution. Okay, but the laughs indicate that you do know these people. I'm encouraged. When I left Claremont, I studied in the East and then in Europe. I was neither blonde nor tanned, and so I was exiled to places less pleasant, less calm, less mellow than this wonderful setting where you've completed 4 years of reflection, deep introspection, exposure to the traditions of science and the arts, and the Friday night kegger in the wash. Yeah? I was under 18. I wouldn't know about that. But coming from California, where every man and woman can reinvent himself at will, I felt a need to study history, try to sort out and analyze the permanent signifiers of meaning in an otherwise changing world. In fact, I studied so much history that I nearly became an academic before I realized that there was no future in the past. So what does someone like me do in a case like that? I joined the welfare system for overeducated idealists. It's called the Foreign Service. Now, why do I say idealist? Let me reflect a bit on my diplomatic career. In my nearly 30 years as a diplomat, I've been fortunate enough to represent the United States of America. In doing so, I don't just carry a message from Washington to other countries, or report on the doings of foreign governments, or dress in the local kaftan, lurk in the bazaar, and spread wicked rumors so as to confound our nation's enemies. I don't do that. It's true, of course, that I represent American interests. Tough and hard-nosed at times, and if you don't take that service part of the Foreign Service seriously, it's not a career for you. But one of the great things about serving America overseas is you get to serve a country that's based its identity not on tribal membership and not on cultural traditions, or on a specific language, but on a set of values. And imagine a career where you actually get paid to be idealistic. And if you're idealistic enough, you can succeed. If then by success you mean 2 tours in Iraq, where you get acquainted to the sound of incoming 107mm rockets, getting your embassy burned out from under you in Serbia, and working long hours in the dust and monsoon in Pakistan, a president that President Obama has told me, quote, keeps him awake at night, unquote. But it still pays better than being an adjunct professor. And let me not mock idealism, because I embrace it. Idealism is not just the quality of believing in the goodness of others and the ability of reasonable people to come to reasonable agreements on difficult issues, if the will is there. Of course, that's what my mom told me. My mom, Pomona College, class of 1947. And that's what my wife agrees with, too. So again, happy Mother's Day. That's twice. Right? Right? But it's more than that, actually. It's believing in the purpose of your work, embodied best by the words of President Kennedy, who said that God's work on earth must truly be our own. I believe you can make things better at home and abroad. And I believe that idealism, both in foreign policy and in any career, can only sustain itself if it's reinforced, and if that reinforcement comes from a second term, which is solidarity. Now, my first overseas assignment as a Foreign Service officer was in Poland. It's a Poland that no longer exists, just like that old Claremont never exists, or doesn't exist anymore. Communist martial law Poland, and the good guys, the solidarity guys, were underground. They were idealists who believed that they could achieve the impossible, to topple a dictatorship. But from those activists, like Lech Wałęsa and Henryk Wujec, we learned that there is no freedom without solidarity. In Polish, you say, nie ma wolności bez solidarności. There is no freedom without solidarity. And what did they mean? No freedom without solidarity means that it's a good question for all of you, Generation Y or Z or whatever you are, kids, to think about. It's not enough to be free yourself, to follow your individual conscience. In those old bloc countries, you didn't just free yourself from a dictator. You had to reach out to others who are unlike you, perhaps less fortunate, so that their freedom is a freedom that you win and you share together. Or as a solidarity activist used to say, for your freedom and for ours. I know that's ancient history, 1989, back when all of you were sitting in the queue waiting to be born. And you probably tell me that I sound like a broken record speaking of the past, but besides, what do you guys know about broken records? Right? Do any of you know what a broken record is? What? But see, back here they're laughing. But let me tell you, representing American values in communist Poland did teach me that we have an extraordinarily positive change in living our values and that we can learn in the process. Now, from there I went to Czechoslovakia. You remember Czechoslovakia. No, I guess you don't remember Czechoslovakia. You were too busy writing your first thesis on quantum mechanics so you could get into a good kindergarten, right? Yes. Well, you know, I can barely remember Czechoslovakia myself, although that may have something to do with the quality of the beer in that part of the world. Czechoslovakia broke into two parts shortly after I arrived in 1992, and at that point, I realized something else about the world, that it's not just California where people reinvent themselves all the time. Representing American values, I was able to contribute to a process of reinvention of state and society whose impressive leader, the former dissident Václav Havel, placed idealistic concepts like decency, respect, and generosity alongside the broader concepts of freedom and equality and justice. So to whom did the Czechs look for help? To the Americans, because even if others might see gaps between our ideals and our actions, we still profess them and we take them seriously. They respected our ideals and we demonstrated solidarity with the Czechs. They expected nothing less, and the good guys won. In the following years, I was involved in projects that sought to erase the line that Stalin had drawn on Europe. The institutions of European unity are very idealistic. And so these countries from the East joined NATO, an organization based on the notion that an attack on one is an attack on all, and what could be a better expression of solidarity. They also joined the European Union, an organization based on lofty ideals, which seemed like kind of a good idea at the time. But what happened to these permanent signifiers of meaning in an otherwise changing world? I was evacuated from my desk in the White House on 9/11, pushed out the gate of the old executive office building. This experience taught me two things. First, that we were witnessing a huge change in the way American would deal with the world. And secondly, that I was on the B list, since I wasn't taken to the undisclosed location to hang around underground and give advice to Dick Cheney. It's always good to be reminded of your limits and to remain humble. Always, along with my striving for idealism and my commitment to solidarity, I'd say gaining a little humility is a good thing too. So if you remember nothing else from my talk today, I hope you'll remember the three words of idealism, solidarity, and humility. In recent years, I've left Central Asia. Instead, I volunteered for service in Iraq, then Serbia, then Iraq again, and now Pakistan. I've done this because those who serve America and its values in rewarding settings like Central Europe must be willing to serve America in difficult settings, morally difficult and physically difficult. Do I sound like an idealist? I certainly hope so. So early in 2006, I opened the provincial reconstruction team in Iraq in the city of Mosul. And during my subsequent tour of duty, friends of mine were killed and wounded, not something that I ever thought I'd experience as a diplomat. I learned not only about Iraq, but something also about my home country as well. One night, insurgents briefed the perimeter of our base and killed a number of our colleagues. The next evening, I called together the team of military and civilians I commanded, and we discussed safety. They asked me, what kind of gun do you have in your hooch? Hooch is where you live, right? I said, I don't have a gun. No. What gun did you bring from home? The one that you own in America. And I said, well, no, I don't own a gun in America. I didn't bring one. They said, you didn't? I said, no. There was silence. They said, are you a Democrat? And I said, let me tell you 4 things. First, I'm a Democrat. Second, Democrats are patriots too. Third, I voted for George McGovern, who incidentally was a war hero, right? Fourth, I'm your commanding officer. There was more silence, and then they looked at me and they said, what are you doing here? And that was, in a broad sense, a healthy question. What were we doing there, right? But to my comrades, to these loyal Red Staters, they seemed to know who George McGovern was, which was good. You don't know who George McGovern was? Parents, listen. Parents, are you sure that this tuition is worth it? If it, you know? But the lesson here is another kind of solidarity, a solidarity for those in the United States who have responded in the decades since 9/11 in different ways than I have. Maybe others who have different habits, say having guns in their hooches, but who believe just as sincerely as I do in the same values and remain committed to the same ideals. And so, in the spirit of humility, I have to tell you that in Baghdad and Belgrade, I single-handedly oversaw the withdrawal from Iraq, single-handedly steered Serbia toward reconciliation with Kosovo, and onto the membership path of the European Union. Now, when I sent these phrases to the State Department to be cleared for this speech, they said, excuse me, Mr. Ambassador, I'm not sure that you successfully did this all on your own. And I said, when you're speaking to people at Pomona College, they understand irony. Believe me, they do. I didn't really do it all myself. And so why do I brag, though? I just can't help it. I mean, when you're from Claremont, that oasis in a sea of harsh materialism and strip malls, that perfect gem of a small-town America whose greatest institution, Pomona College, is a beacon of light and hope for this benighted planet in comparison to other liberal arts institutions I won't name. Well, can't I be a little bit proud of that now and then, right? Maybe I should say it right, that I've learned pride in our institutions, pride in our spirit of generosity that I still recognize in America, and pride in those fellow citizens like you who will live by the shared values in the years to come. But back to humility. To teach myself humility, really, I volunteered to go to Pakistan. Now, Pakistan is a great country, is a culture entirely based on eating. And fortunately, biryani is very good for you if taken in moderation. But the main point about food in Pakistan is not how it tastes, but the situation it describes. Pakistanis eat so they can talk. Meals are the settings for discussion. And as ambassador, I go to a lot of meals. So I hear a lot of talk and a lot of discussion. And I love Pakistanis who preface every sentence by announcing, I'm no diplomat, so I'm going to be blunt with you. And in this way, they're just like Americans. And like Americans, they can be very critical. And over samosas and tea, the criticism of the United States is that we're arrogant and unfeeling, that we don't appreciate the sacrifice that Pakistanis have made fighting terrorism over the last decade, that we somehow like India best, and a host of other grievances that go back decades. And I believe this criticism is really based on a Pakistani perception that in their eyes, America isn't living up to its promise. That is, we talk about freedom, but they complain that innocent Pakistanis aren't free to travel to the United States. So we talk about equality, but somehow, yeah, we love India better than Pakistan. They talk about justice, and we seem, they say, to support ineffective or corrupt governments. But what they're really saying is that Pakistan is a country in which many people still believe in the idealism that America purveys. And even if a sense of grievances makes America unpopular there, there's a deep desire to be friends with the United States, for America to reemerge in their imagination as a country of ideals, of universal values. These are not criticisms Americans like to hear. And yet, with a little humility, we can learn from these criticisms. With a little solidarity, we can commit to work with Pakistan to address issues, people-to-people contact, regional cooperation, good governance. And with a little idealism, we can believe in the future of Pakistan. That doesn't mean unquestioned acceptance of every detail in the Pakistani narrative of grievance and hurt, because Pakistan has to take full responsibility for its own mistakes as well. But it does mean defining the success of Pakistani democracy as a success for America. And more rice, please, and I'd like the doll. And let's not forget, too, that we're locked in a struggle with those who would destroy democratic institutions, stamp out tolerance, and strangle diversity. I like to think that I'm a man of peace, but I want to make the distinction clear. I'm not a pacifist. There are times when you have to fight for what you believe. And the fight that I've joined, a fight that you may have no choice about joining, is a terrible thing, but it's necessary. And in this fight, Pakistan is not the enemy. Those in Pakistan who believe in democracy and tolerance are our natural allies. And I always prefer to fight alongside my friends, America and Pakistan, with other friends, against a common enemy. So my task as a diplomat is not to shy away from a fight. It's to make sure that we win the fight together with those who share our ideals. Now, there's some of the ideals that American and Pakistanis strive to maintain. What's lacking now is a sense of solidarity that like-minded people should have. From a Pakistani viewpoint, it's hard to identify with a country that sent helicopters into its territory without prior notification to nab Osama bin Laden. From an American viewpoint, it's hard to identify with a country in which Osama bin Laden was able to live undetected for 5 years in a town not far from the capital. The mistrust runs deep on both sides. There are legitimate reasons for Pakistanis who are thoughtful to be concerned, if not despairing. The pressure of the war in Afghanistan and the daily threat of terrorism, the weakness of the Pakistani economy, the extraordinary burden of looming demographic catastrophe, because in Pakistan it's going to be the fifth largest country in the world soon, with 60% of its population under 25. Meanwhile, many Americans are unhappy. And to quote that great philosopher of the Southland, Randy Newman, we give them money, but are they grateful? No, they're spiteful and they're hateful. Now, I know you've never heard of Randy Newman. Thank God for YouTube. It's a version of a quaint institution we used to refer to as a library, right? So it's out there. But in Pakistan, we need to have wise policies in which American security and economic interests are served, where we take into account changes and opportunities into the region, where the ongoing fight against terrorism must continue strong and effective. That goes without saying. And similarly, we need to help the Pakistanis with the necessary economic reforms to fight corruption, continue their fight against militants who challenge the writ of the state and their borders, and work with us in the region east and west. It's not just a matter of Pakistan doing what we think is right. It's a matter of Pakistan fulfilling its own potential and America being there to help it do so. And yet what I've learned as a diplomat is that wise policy, difficult as it is to conceive and implement, is only a part of what's necessary. The wise policy has to have an idealistic component. Countries who work together on wise policy must show a sense of solidarity to succeed. And these are not qualities you learn when you study the impact of the Peace of Westphalia in 1648. And I would know, because I used to teach innocent young minds like yours about the impact of the Peace of Westphalia from 1648. But I got over it. To get these ideals and to recognize and act on this solidarity, America and Pakistan would benefit from a little more humility. That is the lesson I've drawn, that if I can't force these things on my Pakistani counterpart, at least I can do my best to apply them to my own work, to guide the American diplomatic mission in Pakistan by these principles. And in the toughest of times in foreign policy, and believe me, Pakistan these days is the toughest of times, to retain the optimism which itself is an important ingredient of the success of diplomacy. That leads to solidarity by example, decent ethical behavior that we show every day, standing ready to follow the lead of decent and ethical Pakistanis who want the same thing for their country. So thanks for the wonderful meal, and let's talk again. Yeah. From this illustration, then, let me take you to return to you, then, the graduating class of 2012 in Pomona. And I urge you to consider whichever path you choose to take as you make your way down Indian Hill Boulevard into the mean streets of post-college life after that last French roast at 42nd Street Bagel. The importance of humility, and as a diplomat, I've learned the skill of listening, at least trying to listen, putting myself in the shoes of someone who thinks differently, and not yet losing my convictions and beliefs. I've been fortunate enough to be able to apply my learning, as you surely must, to principles such as solidarity, which has helped me grasp how deep the distance is between people and how bad it can be in challenging situations, how those situations cannot be overcome unless solidarity is expressed. And most of all, I've learned through a number of experiences that you may have not expected that your ideals not only grow and remain intact, but can even grow, as they have in my case. I believe now more in the values that I did 30 years ago, and it's probably the greatest gift I've gotten from my career. I suppose that make this path of mine sound like it's the best of all possible worlds, something right up there at the level of the combination dinner number 7 at tropical Mexico. It's hardly that. I've seen a great deal of suffering. I've sometimes felt crushed by the weight of our own bureaucracy. I've ensured through this nomad existence as a diplomat that my wife and children have no place that they can call home. But these challenges are not unique to the Foreign Service. These challenges will find their ways into your lives as well, in varying ways and at varying times. I've tried to cope with these challenges by renewing my faith in ideals, in finding common cause with others, and reminding myself that I'm not unique, that everyone is finding his or her own path. And that's where I end up after all these years so far from Claremont, when I first sought the permanent signifiers of meaning in an otherwise changing world. And whether I found them in the winters in the Pripyat marshes or in the scarred sands of the Nineveh plains or in the muddy banks of the Indus River, you'll find your own paths, as I know that you'll describe to your parents later on. And no matter what I say to you today, but I ask, may you all benefit, as I believe I have, from the wisdom of ideals, solidarity, and humility in the years to come. Thank you.